Now, Sir Keir Starmer says that a Labour government would cut heart disease and stroke deaths by a quarter within a decade.
It's one of the big plans he's announcing today to fix the NHS. We're going to talk to him now because he joins us from Essex. Sir Keir Starmer, wow. Well, you've definitely gone somewhere to advertise the fact you're talking about the NHS this morning, aren't you? They're in front of a lineup of ambulances. First, I just want to talk to you about the Home Secretary, who is in some hot water this morning. Do you think what she's done is a terrible offence? A lot of people getting in touch this morning, a number of them saying it's a storm in a teacup. She just asked someone, was it possible to arrange a private one-on-one speed awareness course? She wasn't trying to get out of the penalty at all. What's her crime?
Yeah, I mean, first, can I just get a little bit of frustration off my chest? Because obviously I want to talk about our NHS plan and the Home Secretary. You know, there's another scandal in government, and quite rightly, therefore, you want to ask me about that. But so many times we're here with a positive message and then we're reacting to something like this. Look, I think the long and the short, as far as I know, I don't know all the facts, but it looks to me as though the Home Secretary's actions were inappropriate and they should be investigated. I think the Prime Minister has said that he wants to meet his ethics advisor today. Well, he should. In my view, he should say to his ethics advisor, you need to fully investigate this, because we don't know all the facts. It looks like she's been asking civil servants to do something they shouldn't be doing. If so, we need to get to the bottom of it. But, you know, the only way that's going to happen is with an investigation. So I'd simply say to the Prime Minister, you know, you talked about integrity, about transparency and honesty. I think the right thing, therefore, to do is to see the ethics advisor, of course, this morning, and say to him, please investigate fully.
Just one more question on this before we get on to the NHS, because we want to talk about that as well. It is important. If the story stands up, if the allegations that we've all read in the papers yesterday stand up, do you think she should go?
Well, I think if she's breached the ministerial code, she should go. I haven't, Richard, the story seems to be emerging step by step, so I don't know all the facts. But in the end, it's the ministerial code that matters, and that's why you've got an advisor. I think if there's an investigation that finds she's broken the ministerial code, then I think it will be difficult for her because, Richard, as you know, this won't be the first time for the Home Secretary. And it's very difficult for a Prime Minister to say, look, I do believe in accountability and transparency, and then take no action if there's a breach of the code. But I don't want to get ahead of myself. I don't know anything more about the facts than you do, which is why I think it needs to be investigated.
OK, right. You want to fix the NHS. I think every single politician in the country wants to fix the NHS. But how much money are you going to put into fixing the NHS, and how are you going to raise that money?
Yeah, well, my ambition is this. The NHS is, I often say it's on its knees. My wife, who works for the NHS, says, no, Keir, it's not on its knees, it's on its face. And it needs to be lifted up and swiftly. So if we're privileged enough to be voted into government next year, the first job will, of course, be to repair, rebuild, get the NHS back on its feet. But what I'm setting out today goes way beyond that because it begins to answer the question, how do we build an NHS fit for the future? So not just dealing with the immediate problems, the waiting list, the 8 a.m. scramble for a GP, not being able to get a GP when you need one, being worried about ambulances and A&E. They are the everyday worries after 13 years of this government, of millions of people watching this programme. But we've also got to answer the difficult question of how do we build an NHS fit for the future? Now, on the question of money, which you rightly asked me about, I do recognise that's part of the answer, and we'll set out in terms the funding as we get closer to the election. But I'm very, very keen to make it clear this morning that money isn't everything. I've run a public service. I ran the Crown Prosecution Service for 5 years. And I do know that if you put more money in the top, then you do get a slightly better product. But you're only going to get real change if you change and reform. And what I'm setting out today is change and reform of the NHS. So, for example, on the big killers, which is heart disease, cancer and, very sadly, suicide, I'm setting out our plans to tackle those much earlier on in a preventative way. Cancer screening is a classic example of that. If you can screen early, you can catch cancer much earlier. That is obviously much better for the individual concerned and much reduces the cost of the NHS.
Is part of the plan, for instance, to recruit more staff? Is that how you get people seen earlier? And obviously the unions say you have to pay staff more. That's why we've seen so many strikes. All of that does cost money. Presumably you're going to tell the electorate how much money and who's going to pay for it, because you've got to do it somehow, presumably by raising taxes.
Yeah, what we want to do is to take your point on staff, we want to double the number of people training to come into the NHS. There's, I don't know how many thousands upon thousands of vacancies in the NHS. We need the cavalry, the next generation, to come in. So we want to double the training of doctors, nurses, district nurses, you name it. The biggest expansion of the NHS workforce in its history, and we've set out that we'll pay for that by getting rid of the non-dom status tax, which is the way in which very rich people avoid or don't pay their tax in this country. We say we'd get rid of that, use that money directly for the staff. But there are also other issues. I mean, my wife works in a hospital and people would be familiar with the strains on hospitals. We want to move, and we're setting out today how we'd move from a hospital-based approach, which often catches things late in the day, to something which is much closer to home, community-based care. And that will include, for example, 8,500 mental health specialists in our communities, because if you're dealing with something like suicide, which tragically and almost unbelievably is the biggest killer of young people, then we do need that mental health support closer to our communities, and we need appointments that are measured in weeks, not years. And that will be paid for by closing one of the loopholes on private equity.
All right, so Keir, in the time we have left, let's turn to you as leader of the Labour Party. This, I think, I'm right in saying, is your 11th or 12th interview, broadcast interview, that you've given since the local elections a couple of weeks ago. Is that a response to your personal poll ratings? Your party ratings are good. They're way ahead of the Tories. But your personal poll ratings pretty much match the Prime Minister's. You don't seem to be able to cut through and connect with the voters. What's the problem?
Well, Richard, what I've been concentrating on is I took over the Labour Party, just about 3 years and a couple of months ago, and we'd just come off the back of the worst election result since 1935. And my job as leader of the Labour Party was to knock us into shape, change the Labour Party, take difficult decisions, take on the government, and to set out what we would do, because we're often asked what we would do if we were in power. I've changed the party. That work is never finished. And not many people now say, Keir, you haven't changed the Labour Party. We've exposed the government. I think that's there for all to see. And the bit we're on now is setting out what we would do, which is why I'm setting out my plan for the NHS today. And, Richard, I've been challenged everywhere along that 3 years by you and others, quite rightly, usually to say, why aren't you making better progress? If you look at it over the 3 years, what you'll see as a Labour Party is not just change, but is progressing. Each time we have elections, we build on what we did before. And in those local elections of 2-3 weeks ago now, we showed that we're on course for a Labour majority, but only if we kick on set out our plans. And that's what I've been concentrating on.
Keir Starmer, one of the things you might want to do is rewrite your pledges, because we went out to ask people in your constituency in London if they know what your 5 missions for a better Britain are. Just have a listen to what they told us.
I have no idea. I have no idea.
I don't know what they are. I would hope something around impacting the economy and taking us out of this cost of living crisis.
I couldn't tell you, but I imagine it's probably to do with unemployment or the NHS.
I know he wants to make change and have it so we've not got such a financial gap between the rich and the poor.
I think he's totally got it wrong, and he's more interested in taking the Tories down than he is actually promoting a viable cause for the country.
We promised you, Sir Keir, that isn't a skewed take. That is kind of what everybody was saying. So you need a snappier message, don't you?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, Richard, firstly, thank you for having me on, because it gives me the chance on the day we're launching our mission on the NHS to get that across. And, of course, we're only just at the launching stage of the mission, so we need to have those 5 missions out very, very clearly. I do think that very many people understand that we've got to fix the immediate problem with the NHS, but we've got to fix the fundamentals as well. So I don't think anybody's saying these missions are the wrong thing, but, you know, we need to keep coming on your programme and other programmes to reiterate, explain and reassure.
Yeah. Do you think you need to take a line possibly from the American administration of some years past with a big sign in the Oval Office saying it's the economy, stupid? Because what most people were telling us in our Vox Pops, our street interviews, was it's the economy, it's the cost of living, not the NHS, not the other issues you've been mentioning, the economy.
Well, the two go together, Rich, as far as I'm concerned. The first mission I launched was growing the economy, fastest sustainable growth in the G7. And I want that felt in living standards improving every single place across the country, because I absolutely get that the cost of living crisis is making life very, very difficult for millions of families. I absolutely understand that, and that's why we've said so much about the cost of living crisis. But we've got to have an economic plan for the country that lifts those living standards. That goes actually hand in hand with what we're saying about the NHS, because firstly, the money you need for the NHS will only realistically come if we're able to grow the economy, because that will give us greater yield. But also, we'll only grow the economy if we have a healthy population, you know, both physical health and mental health. Millions upon millions of days are lost at the moment. Working days are lost because people aren't fit for work because they haven't got the healthcare they need. So the two aren't separate or in different boxes, as far as I'm concerned. They go together. But, you know, today I'm able to set out what we want to do to make sure the NHS is fit for the future. I think everybody would expect an incoming Labour government to repair the NHS. This is about what we do for the future.
Just briefly before we let you go, so you mentioned that you're going to fund part of this by abolishing non-dom status. That would give you £3 billion. The annual budget for the NHS is over 160 billion. How else are you going to raise money? Because many people might think a Labour government will put up taxes. Will you?
Look, where we've said we'll put up tax, we've been clear what we will do. So that's the non-dom status you've just referred. We do want to close some of the loopholes in our tax system. There's a loophole for private equity. We would close that and use that money directly to fund 8,500 mental health advisors, community-based, if at all possible, because that's,
income
I think,
tax,
where
would
they're
it go
needed.
up under a Labour government?
And then
national insurance?
No, I don't want income tax to go up under a Labour government. Tax is at a very, very high level that it is. But what I'm setting out today is acknowledging that more money does need to go into the NHS, and we'll set out in terms what that is as we get closer to the election.
You don't want tax to go up.
But
you don't want income tax to go up, but are you ruling out income tax going up or national insurance?
No. Look, we've no plans for increasing tax. That isn't how we've started this. But we have looked at the question of how we better use the money that's available. One of the problems we've got with the NHS winter crisis is that the government makes funds available, but usually too late in the year to be used effectively. But I want to come back to a central point, because it is very important to me. Having run a public service, I do know that there's always a call for more money. I understand that. But I also understand that if you don't change and reform, then what you really get out of your public services won't be materially better than what you've got now. I'm determined that I want future generations to look back on the next Labour government and say, that was the government that rolled up its sleeve, got to grips with the problems of the NHS and actually turned it around using technology, using prevention, getting to grips with the big killers and gave us an NHS that we can be proud of for the next 75 years.
All right, thank you.
So, Keir Starmer, thank you very much indeed.